100 years ago, Britain didn't just control this tiny island. It had an empire which spanned the globe. It stretched far south, throughout Africa, across the Atlantic and into the Americas, and east, into Asia and Australia. Over a period of around 400 years, British explorers travelled to all corners of the earth. They set up British colonies there, often through violent means. Today, the map looks very different, the British Empire a distant memory. But what's happened to the former colonies? Some grew wealthy, even overtaking their former ruler, but others suffered, facing decades of poverty and deprivation. It's time to ask the question, what really are the long-term consequences of colonial rule?
I started looking at data. I looked at cross-country data at that time, and I looked at the 20 poorest countries of the world. At that time, 19 out of the 20 were colonies.
That's Lakshmi Iyer, a development economist from the University of Notre Dame.
So I'm like, okay, it does not look like a coincidence that so many poor countries are colonies. The question, of course, is that because of colonial rule?
Lakshmi wanted to find out whether colonial rule was the reason some places are poorer today. To answer this, she started to look at India. From 1858, the British government took control of the country, but only around half of India's state came under British rule. 680 remained under the control of Indian kings, whilst Britain controlled the foreign policy of these native states. Otherwise, they governed themselves.
We have areas that were directly ruled by the British. This was under direct colonial rule. And there were places which are not officially colonized. They had some British influence, as I mentioned, but they were not colonies.
This provided a great natural experiment. We can compare the two types of states, one ruled by the British and one by local leaders. So Lakshmi started to look at the data. By 1991, the fraction of villages with primary schools wasn't very different between former British and native states. It was a similar picture for healthcare. Add in a range of other things which show development, and the story's the same. There's no real difference between formerly British-ruled and native-ruled states. It wasn't looking like colonialism did have the impact Lakshmi had predicted. But wait, there's a problem with this answer. Look again at the map of British-ruled states. Note that in the northwest is the desert area of Rajasthan. The British barely took control of states here. The same is true for central India, which is covered by large forests. Most of these areas remained under the control of Indian kings. Look north to the fertile plains of the river Ganges though, and the story's different. Britain chose to annex all this land. See, Britain chose to control the states which had the best agricultural potential, where you could grow the most.
When you look at agricultural outcomes, you have to worry that what you're picking up is not the effect of British colonization, but the effect of the places the British chose to colonize. They picked the better places.
This is not a fair comparison of the two types of rule, since British-controlled states had, by definition, more economic potential. So it was back to the drawing board. For a different paper, Lakshmi had been looking into the history of India, when she came across this guy, Lord Dalhousie, Governor-General of India. He introduced a controversial policy known as the doctrine of lapse. It said that the British would take any Indian state where the king died without a natural heir. As we saw, the British largely chose to annex the places with the best economic potential. But now, Britain took over some Indian states for no other reason than chance.
This is like almost tossing a coin. In one sense, it's the perfect natural experiment.
So now we can compare the states where lapse happened, taken over by the British, with the native states controlled by Indian kings. When we do this, the results look different. There's still a similar level of primary schools, but former British states have fewer middle schools today, and fewer paved roads, and less healthcare centres. For every 100 babies that were born in formerly British states, 11 died before they reached age 1. In formerly native-ruled states, it's 8. So, even 100 years later, those places once ruled by Britain were still worse off. The effects of colonialism could still be felt a century later. This is not to say all hope is lost.
So in the 1970s, there was a big push to provide schools to villages that did not have any school nearby, to provide health centers to places that did not have health centers nearby or in their own village. And in fact, we find that those are effective.
British rule made India worse off, but over time, the country has managed to bounce back. The impacts of colonialism are long-lasting, but they don't last forever. Thank you to Lakshmi Iyer for her support as part of this project. Please watch further videos in our series delivered by Discover Economics and Cage Research Centre. Please visit our website and follow us on social media.